Do you want to talk some recruiting?
Yes. So we're going to have a story this week about high school recruiting in the 2026 class. And the reality is that the state of Nebraska this year has a number of kids, 5 so far, and quite frankly, Evan, it could be 8, who are committed to Iowa State. Now, the story here, to some degree, is about what Iowa State's doing. The story is also, to some degree, about what Nebraska is not doing, which is they're not offering these kids that are committed to Iowa State. They haven't offered any of them. Mm-hmm. The third story is it used to be that when Nebraska didn't offer these kids, they didn't get offers from other schools like that. Mm-hmm. It just didn't happen very often. It used to happen in the 80s and the 90s. For many years, it didn't happen at all. Now, all of a sudden, I think you're seeing schools making independent evaluations decisions because, why? Because of Huddle. Because they got the film.
Yeah.
And they don't have to, they don't have to order out for it, and the logistics of it are so much easier to scan the players. They're seeing these kids that have, and a lot of these guys are tight end linebacker types. So Ben Bramer opened that door a couple of years ago when he went to Iowa State. Mm-hmm. Iowa State has always tried to recruit this area. I don't think they're necessarily getting every player here, but there's just a number of guys that are, and a lot of them are what you would call what's the right best word for it? Linebacker, safety, tight end types. So I am pulling it up as we speak. All right. And so, the names of the guys are Marion Jackson, so the receiver from North-South. Not sure why Nebraska hasn't offered him, but they didn't. And I think Marion Jackson's a pretty good football player, and he has not been offered. Caprice Keith, who committed to Iowa State a while ago, and he was at Bell West. I think he's now at Central. Barry Fries, who's at Elkhorn North, linebacker. Kean Kaiser, linebacker in Sydney. And Terrell Chapman, a safety at North Star, who could grow into a linebacker. He's 6'2". He's got a nice frame. So 3 of these guys are defenders that you would call that. And then you've got Marion Jackson. And then you've got Caprice Keith, who could play receiver. He could play defensive back. They're also after Jet Tamala, the quarterback out of North-South, the only 4-star guy in the state. Yep. Darian Jones, Donovan Jones' brother. Most people think he's going to Nebraska, but he has not committed right away.
Right.
And he knows everything there is to know about Nebraska. And then Isaac Jensen, the tight end. He's not going to Nebraska. But Iowa State could be in there. And then Leighton Burbach, who is an offensive tackle out of Norfolk Catholic. And so the reality is Nebraska's offered 3 guys in the state, Jensen, Jones, and Jace Reynolds out of Elkhorn North. And Reynolds just took another visit to Nebraska, so he's Barry's teammate. And they haven't offered these other guys. And these other guys, I've talked to 3 of them. They're pretty candid about, I liked Nebraska growing up. I didn't, I wasn't like, one of them is the son of a former Husker. So that's kind of notable. He didn't get an offer from Nebraska, didn't get much attention at all from Nebraska. Nebraska is, at this moment, as we know, in a situation where they have a roster size crunch.
Right.
They still have a young roster. They still have a lot of guys that they signed in the 2020, what would have been the 2023 and the 2024, and to some degree the 2025 class. But the 2023 and the 2024 classes were very large, had a bunch of in-state guys. Mm-hmm. Everybody was talking about how Nebraska recruiting was back in-state, and Ed Foley was making all the tours. And, of course, Ed's now not on the road recruiting. He's got some other role within the department, but he's not the special teams coordinator anymore. And so I think the story's probably going to get some attention.
Sure.
In part because the guys will be, some of the kids are like, Nebraska just really never talked to me. And that's always sensitive around here. Husker fans have always been way more about the football kids than they have been about the basketball kids. And I think some of that is because of the way the media covers it. And a lot of the basketball media around here doesn't just finds reasons to say, well, it wasn't going to work between Fred Hoiberg and this guy, or Tim Miles and this guy, and this guy wasn't good enough, and this guy didn't went to an open gym, and he didn't do very well, and so he couldn't have come here, even though he was all conference somewhere else. And there's all kinds of reasons that are given for why local kids don't play basketball at Nebraska, even though if you compiled all of those guys and put them at Nebraska, they probably have won an NCAA tournament game right now.
Yeah,
If Chucky Hepburn and Hunter Salas and St. Thomas and all these guys are there, they've probably won an NCAA tournament game if they had been there. But that didn't happen that way. But in football, it feels like there's always this sort of critical eye. I remember Drew Ott being one that went to Iowa. It's like, how did Drew Ott get away? He was an 8-man player, you know. And
Yep.
It was legit. I remember when Sean Prater out of Omaha Central left, you know, and went to Iowa. There's been obviously other ones over the years. And so it'll get some attention. I think Iowa State could very easily get 6 to 8 guys from the state of Nebraska in this class. The crown jewel of that would be Tamala, who is at Millard South. He's a good quarterback. I think he's a better throwing on the run than he is in the pocket. I think he's got some mobility skills. He's not coming to Nebraska because Nebraska already has its 2026 quarterback in Dayton Raiola. So they put a lot of energy toward the Raiola family and Dayton Raiola's gotten taller. He looks like a different quarterback than he did a year and a half ago.
I think you can make you made a case for like why Nebraska wouldn't go after some of these guys now, and Matt Rule said it too. Like there's just not room for walk-ons at this point. They have a roster crunch that they're working through. The other piece that's interesting to me, and I'll be curious to hear kind of the feedback from fans, is like how big a deal is this now versus how big a deal would it have been 6 years ago?
Right.
Because I think now we're so conditioned to say, well, the team's going to build through the portal primarily.
Right.
And then the secondary piece is going to be the high school stuff. We saw how high school signing day was treated last year in the middle of the week and sort of an afterthought almost as Nebraska was starting to get ready for bowl and transfer portal was opening. Like the prestige of high school recruiting outside the very top guys, in my opinion, has way decreased in the portal era. And so Nebraska, as part of the Big Two, with plenty of rev share, the max amount of rev share, like they're going to build through the portal. I think that's going to be a common practice. They're going to, of course, recruit high school as well, but you're going to have to be more selective than Nebraska's ever been. I mean, than Matt Rule's ever been. It's going to be, and he said it before, less developmental, more about professional traits.
Yeah.
Are you going to be able to play and do that? So I don't know. I think in 2018, fans would have been really upset about everything that you just laid out and these local kids not getting chances. Now, I think they'd say if they hit right and if Nebraska spends well in the portal and guys turn out and the Huskers are winning games, then it's just a byproduct of the era. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think you make a good point. What's a little bit different about this story is that if it were that one kid was committed to Iowa State and another one Iowa and another one Kansas and another one K-State and another one Kentucky, that would be one thing. Iowa State wants all of these kids, all of them in one class. There's something like, why? Like, so what they're saying is, I'm sure Iowa State uses the portal too.
They do.
What Iowa State's doing is they're saying we're going to fill 50% of our high school class with kids from the state of Nebraska. And they don't have to do that.
It hasn't been this high in the past, though, has it?
No,
I mean, you mentioned
it has
Bramer.
not. But that's what's interesting about it is that I'm sure they have fewer spots to give away for high school kids. And it is at this very moment that they decide to invest most of their recruiting energy in kids from Nebraska.
Yeah.
Now, I wonder if some of that's related to these kids from Nebraska are not going to cost as much money.
There's a Moneyball aspect.
And they are good as some of the players that we would get somewhere else.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, now Nebraska is going after some dudes. And we haven't talked as much about prep recruiting, and we probably should have. And we're going to try to do more of that in the next couple of weeks. But Nebraska's going after some dudes in prep recruiting. Mm-hmm. They are. They're not. They're not
national guys. Yeah.
Yeah. They're not foregoing it. And so, they're not throwing their hands up. But very few of these guys are what I would describe as cheap.
Yeah.
These are players. I mean, it's one of the top 5 tight ends of the country. These guys are not going to be free. I'm not saying that the guys that are going to Iowa State are, but I think what Iowa State's making a conscious choice in a time when there are fewer high school slots to be more local with those guys. Will they be more loyal? Will they stick at Iowa State? Will they be like, because in a lot of cases, Evan, these were guys that got their first power offer from Iowa State, and it changed their life. Like one of the guys was like, well, yeah, I was, my dad played at Northern Colorado. My mom was a Husker fan. He kind of grew up a half Husker, half Buff fan because he was,
Oh, wow.
And so his family worked, for Cabela's, and then they moved to Springfield, and then they moved back to Sydney. And, he liked the Huskers, but it wasn't like a die-in-the-wool Husker fan. But he got a little bit of attention from Northern Colorado. He got nothing from Deion Sanders. That doesn't surprise us. And he didn't get much from Nebraska. And Iowa State's like, this kid had Wyoming, Lindenwood, Iowa State. Iowa State's a better program than Nebraska over the last 10 years. Let's just be clear. It is. They just played for the Big 12 championship. I don't think Iowa State's intention is to be like, well, we don't want to play for the Big 12 championship anymore. I mean, of course they do. So it's interesting in that way. And I don't think none of the guys had hard feelings about Nebraska. And that has changed. You go back 10 years, and if there was a kid that was going somewhere else and he wasn't going to Nebraska, I remember situations where kids were like, well, I have an offer from Nebraska, but when I got down there, they had me with all the other recruits, and I mean, I'm a Nebraska kid, and I don't really understand. It was different. I don't hear any of that from these guys.
Well, it used to be those, you had to go to Nebraska to get your chance at the NFL.
That's one thing I appreciate. Nebraska did not lead these guys on.
But you needed that exposure. Now you don't need that exposure. It's not just high school recruiting. I mean, it's been proven time and again. If you go to Iowa State, if you go to South Dakota State, if you go wherever, if you're a dude, if you can play,
right,
NFL scouts are going to find you. And those schools can pay you now too. It's not just Nebraska that has the money.
Right.
So you can stay, you can develop, or you can do well enough that you can parlay that into a portal entry in 2 years and make some money elsewhere. The idea that a local kid is more likely to stay, I'd like to do some more research on that, because there are plenty of examples of guys who have stayed local, or who stayed local initially and then moved on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Nebraska, I'm not going to say they got burned by in-state kids, but the reality is they signed 3 guys from Bell West in the 24 class, and all 3 of them left. And Jalen Lloyd, who I thought they developed really well, and they gave Jalen Lloyd an opportunity that other schools weren't giving him. And I thought he had 2 good seasons at Nebraska, and he left.
Nate Borkacher left.
He did.
Local kids. Yeah. But it's the same thing. He could have
time
stayed.
in it.
He did. But that's my point. Is
yes, you're right.
He was developed and he moved on.
No, that's all very true. I mean, I feel a little different about a 4-year guy, but I do think if you're going to apportion a scholarship to somebody, and then they're like, yeah, I'm going to go after 1 year. Well, you feel like you kind of well, what did we signed you? We put ourselves out there, and now you're, because I always feel like coaches feel like they're taking a risk. Tim Beck once told me, and Tim Beck was a better coach than we gave him credit for, but there was a discussion about whether they're going to take this guy or this guy, and it related, I think, to receiver and quarterback. Tim Beck missed on Easton Stick. He took A.J. Bush instead. They should have taken Easton Stick. They didn't. But I think his thought process was always well, if you take an in-state guy, there's always more pressure, because it's expectation. You really got to like an in-state guy because he's more likely to stay. And that's a good point. And I don't know where I'm going, other than to say I think it's going to be an interesting story. The kids aren't mad at Nebraska. I don't think Nebraska let them on. I think that's important. There wasn't oh, we like you, and then there was no ghosting with these 3 guys. Hope to talk to a 4th. I don't think there was much ghosting or anything like that. And I think Nebraska was relatively upfront about their situation. But the reality is Nebraska's offered 3 kids in the state. Isaac Jensen's, his list doesn't appear to include Nebraska. Darian Jones, I think, will probably end up in Nebraska. And the other guy, we'll see. Yeah. Jace Reynolds just got an offer from Northwestern. I think he's going to end up at Nebraska, but there's no guarantee. And so, things are changing. Kids want to leave. They want to go to other places. Interesting stuff.
It is. Do you think the recruiting calendar, the timing of the commitments, is going to stay the same with how the portal has changed things? Like typically you get into May and June, and this is when these guys make their decisions. Do you feel like that's the same, or is it going to be different because of the settlement and because of just how things are changing in the sport?
I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I think you could make alterations to the calendar, have 2 periods, have one in the summer, lock up your main guys first, and then have an additional signing period in February. That's my preference, but I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. Coaches are of 17 different minds, Evan.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they've got 3 commits in their 26 class. 5 years ago, you'd be like, whoa, that's pretty low. Start putting some more hay in the barn. And one of those guys is still actively taking visits to SEC schools and fielding interest everywhere else.
CJ Brona.
Yeah, that's right.
Who's a good player.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Dayton Raiola is, if he had remained on the market and Nebraska hadn't offered him, well, he'd have more offers now because he's grown. He's taller now, and he had a pretty good season last year, and he's just a different quarterback. At 6'1", it didn't seem to me to be quite as. I don't think he's going to be the prospect Dylan is, but he's a different prospect now. So, and who's the third one? Kid from South Dakota.
Vonwell Whitty. Yep.
And we'll
guy,
see there too.
See how he develops.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've tried. They're going after some really big names, and they want good guys in the program. I don't blame them. I think that's a good way to go, because at this point you're not running a place where you're just trying to develop local kids and get them to the NFL. You're trying to win 10, 11, 12 games, and you have to do that with players who can beat Penn State and USC and Michigan. And sometimes what you have to do in order to get that is go other places. Tom Osborne did. Many of his best players were not from around here. Many of his best players were. But if you go back to his teams in the 80s and the 90s and you start rattling off the names, Neil Smith wasn't from around here. Broderick Thomas wasn't from around here. Danny Noonan was. You can go down the list. Steve Taylor was from California. Ken Clark was from Omaha, Bryan. But Derek Brown was from California. And Lawrence Phillips was from California. And Calvin Jones was from Omaha. But it was a good balance of out-of-state superstars and in-state guys.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else?
Nothing else.
All right. Well, this has been fun. We'll be back next week. Talk a little spring event.
Yeah, we'll preview it.
What we're looking for there. That'll be different and interesting and kind of an adventure. Maybe.
The week after, we'll bring in the stuff we got at the garage sale.
Oh man, yeah, there you go. The swag.
We're not going to expense that. We're just going
to everything else. All right, for Sam, I'm Evan. Thanks for listening. Husker Fans Pick 6 Podcast. Talk to you guys later.